It starts with something we've all seen before, flashing lights in the rearview mirror. A routine traffic stop. But this one? It turns ugly, fast. Two local officers think they've pulled over just another black woman on a quiet Alabama highway. What they don't know is, she's not just anyone. She's a high-ranking U.S. Army colonel, trained for war, and respected at the highest levels of government. And when they try to intimidate her, they trigger a chain reaction that reaches all the way to the Pentagon. What follows isn't just a story about one woman, it's about what happens when power gets abused and the wrong person gets underestimated. Because she doesn't raise her voice, she doesn't fight back with force. She fights back with something stronger: truth, discipline, and the full weight of the U.S. military behind her. You don't want to miss this one. Drop a comment below, let us know where you're tuning in from and what time you're watching. And if stories like this matter to you, hit like and subscribe. It helps us keep telling the ones that need to be heard. Let's get into it. You ever drive through the deep South in the fall? That kind of quiet where the wind barely moves the trees and the leaves fall like they've got nowhere to be? That was the kind of day Colonel Naomi Bradford found herself in. A stretch of Alabama highway, smooth as polished glass, winding through tall pines and golden maples. The sun was dipping low, casting a warm amber hue across the hood of her SUV. It was peaceful, the kind of peace you feel in your bones, the kind you know never lasts. Naomi was on her way back home from a weekend Veterans Outreach event down in Montgomery. 3 days of workshops, medical consults, and sharing stories with old soldiers. The kind of work that filled her spirit, even if it wore down her body. She'd spoken on trauma recovery, listened to too many men and women with wounds you can't see on an X-ray, and handed out more hugs than she could count. Her uniform army greens, pressed crisp, still hung proudly on her frame. Her ribbons, medals, insignia, not decoration, but memory. Years of blood, sweat, sand, and war, sewn into every thread. She was 55 now, salt and pepper curls tucked neatly under her cap, tall, poised, with a stare that could calm a panicking medic or silence a boardroom. To anyone who knew her, Naomi Bradford was a living legend, a trauma surgeon who'd served in Iraq and Afghanistan, patched up soldiers in makeshift tents while mortars whistled overhead. But to her, she was just doing what needed to be done. What she'd always done. Her SUV cruised steady at 65 miles per hour, not a soul on the road. The air outside was a gentle 71 degrees, but inside, the AC purred softly. She liked the balance windows cracked just enough to let the scent of pine in. A jazz playlist hummed low in the background, Coltrane weaving through her thoughts. And for a moment, she let her mind drift. To retirement, to her garden back home in Georgia, to maybe spending a little more time painting again. Life, after war. And then, the rearview mirror caught it. Flash of white. A Dodge Charger. Police issue. Hanging back just enough to not be obvious, but too close to ignore. Her eyes flicked to the speedometer. 65. Exactly the limit. She tapped the cruise control to be sure. No mistake. But the feeling in her gut, that subtle twist that every black driver knows too well, it crept in fast. This wasn't new. Not for her, not in uniform, not out of it. That unspoken warning that says, this might not end clean. She didn't overthink it. Just stayed calm. Hands at 10 and 2, shoulders square, back straight. Years in uniform taught her how to survive in hostile territory. She'd navigated convoys through IED zones in Kandahar. She could damn sure handle a highway in Alabama. The Charger's lights kicked on, red and blue, piercing through the fading sunlight. She didn't sigh, didn't flinch, just signaled right and eased onto the shoulder. Tires crunching against gravel. She cut the engine, kept both hands on the wheel, waited. For most Americans, a routine traffic stop is just that, routine. But if you're black, if you're in the South, if you're wearing a uniform that some folks think you don't deserve, it's not routine, it's roulette. Naomi had trained trauma teams under fire, but nothing tensed her shoulders like the sound of boots crunching toward her window. She could see the officer's silhouette now, tall, wiry build, slow swagger like he owned the land and the air above it. His belt rattled cuffs, radio, maybe a baton. His left hand hovered just close enough to his holster to send a message. Tap, tap. His knuckles hit her window. She rolled it down halfway, kept her tone even. "Good evening, officer. Something wrong?" He didn't answer at first, just leaned in close. She could smell his breath, stale coffee, and chewing tobacco as his pale blue eyes scanned her face like she was a counterfeit bill. And when he did speak, his voice had that southern weight to it. License and registration. "No, ma'am. No, please. Just command." His tone didn't ask, it warned. Naomi nodded slowly. "I'm reaching for the glove compartment now," she said, her voice clear, steady, professional. "My license is in my wallet." She moved like a surgeon, every motion visible, deliberate. No sudden moves, no reason to be misunderstood. She handed him her documents. Along with her driver's license was a laminated military ID with her photo. Her rank Lieutenant Colonel, U.S. Army. He took them both, but his eyes stuck on the military card. "You a real colonel?" he asked, the edge in his voice unmistakable. "Yes, sir," she said. "Medical Corps." He stared at her for a long second, then snorted, flipped her license like it was a poker chip, and walked back to his car. And just like that, the air got heavier, not with heat, with tension. Something told her this wasn't over. Naomi watched through the side mirror as the officer lingered at his cruiser, flipping through her ID. She kept her hands planted on the wheel, eyes steady, breathing slow. It wasn't her first traffic stop, hell. It wasn't even her first questionable one, but something about this one was different. There was a stillness in the air now. That kind of stillness you only get before something goes wrong. After what felt like a full minute, the officer stepped out again. He didn't hurry. No. This man walked like the asphalt owed him rent. He was tall, maybe 6'2", lanky but wired tight, like a coil waiting to snap. His face was flushed pink from sun or something stronger. He adjusted his belt, one hand brushing the holster again as he approached her window. He leaned in, too close again. That smile, more a sneer than anything human, crept onto his lips. "Colonel, huh?" he said, drawing out the word like it tasted sour. "Interesting." Naomi didn't respond. She knew better. Let them talk. Let them show you who they are. He held her ID up between two fingers like it offended him. "California plate. Fancy SUV. Out here in the middle of nowhere. You military types think rank gives you a free pass?" She met his eyes, steady. "No, sir. Just returning from a veterans outreach event in Montgomery. I'm headed home." He clicked his tongue. Veterans right." He stepped back, scratched his jaw like he was working out a puzzle only he could see. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Her pulse jumped, but she didn't let it show. "May I ask why, officer?" "You may not," he snapped. "Out, now." She took a breath, calm, controlled, reached slowly for the door handle, unbuckled her seatbelt, and stepped out onto the warm Alabama gravel. Air smelled like pine needles and tension. "Turn around, hands on the hood," he barked. She hesitated. "Excuse me, sir, but what's the cause for a search?" He didn't answer. Instead, he closed the distance fast, grabbed her shoulder, spun her around. His grip was rough, too rough, and he shoved her forward, palms to the metal. The hood of the SUV still radiated heat from the sun, and it stung as her skin touched it. His hands started moving, not careful, not professional. Aggressive. She clenched her jaw as he patted her down. The way he handled her wasn't about protocol. It was about power. "No weapons," he muttered, sounding almost disappointed. "What else you hiding?" "Nothing," she said firmly. He didn't like that. He spun her around again, his face inches from hers. "You people," he said, voice low. "You always got something. I can smell it. The lies, the attitude. Think just 'cause you've got some fancy ID you can walk over the law. You're wrong," she replied, her voice still calm but with a flicker of steel beneath it. He smirked. "Am I?" Then he reached past her and opened the passenger door without asking. He dug into her center console, flipped it open, tossing pens and a granola bar onto the seat like trash. He moved to the glove box, yanked it down hard. Naomi flinched, not from fear, but fury. Her heart was pounding now. Not from danger, but from the weight of helplessness. She knew exactly what this was. This wasn't about safety. This was about control. This was about reminding her she didn't belong here. Not on this road, not in this state, not in that uniform. He turned back, waving a folder of documents. "What's this?" "Medical paperwork," she said. "Service records." He tossed them onto the seat and gave a satisfied grunt. "Might take a while to verify all this. You sit tight." She didn't move. Just watched him stalk back toward his cruiser, shaking his head, muttering something she couldn't quite hear. It probably wasn't meant for her anyway. She turned slowly, leaned back against the SUV, trying to center herself. Her hands were still trembling, even if she kept them at her sides. The sun was dropping lower now. Shadows stretched longer across the pavement. This was no longer just a traffic stop. This was a message. From him, from every man like him. A warning. Stay in your place. Her mind flashed through old drills. How to handle escalation. How to stay in control. She reminded herself this man may have a badge, but she still had her training, her rank, her voice. And most importantly, she had time. The silence stretched. He was still in the car, probably running her plates, maybe calling in backup, maybe making up a reason to arrest her. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw something move. Another vehicle, another patrol car, this one speeding toward them, lights flashing. His stomach dropped. Back up. She didn't know if that made things better or worse. The new cruiser skidded to a stop behind the first. A second officer jumped out, bigger, bulkier, with a shaved head and mirrored sunglasses, even though the sun was setting. This one looked like trouble. He stomped toward her, every step like a threat, and immediately started barking. "What's going on here, Dobson?" The first cop, Officer Dobson, she now knew, called back. "Just a routine stop. She's giving me a little lip." The new one turned his attention to her. "Lip, huh?" He sized her up. "That true?" "I complied fully," she said. "Your partner's detaining me without cause and searching my vehicle illegally." He smirked. "Oh, we've got a lawyer now. I'm a colonel in the United States Army, Medical Corps." He stepped closer, close enough to feel his breath. "Not out here." "You're not." Naomi held her ground. She could feel her throat tighten, but she didn't let her voice crack. "This is harassment, and you both know it." The bigger cop leaned into her face. "What we know is you don't belong on this road, ma'am. California plates. Big SUV. And attitude? That's a red flag out here." She didn't blink. "You're going to regret this." And that was the moment she knew. She couldn't wait anymore. While the two officers circled, sneering, digging through her life with no reason and no shame, Naomi's hand slipped slowly toward her watch. Just one touch, one press, emergency beacon engaged. Somewhere, far away in D.C., the Pentagon was about to get a ping. And these two men? They were about to find out exactly who they'd pulled over. Naomi stood still as stone against her SUV, the early evening casting long shadows across the cracked Alabama road. Her arms crossed tight over her chest, not out of defiance, but self-protection. She could feel the heat of the vehicle behind her, the tension in the air rising like static before a lightning strike. The second officer, still didn't know his name, was circling the car like a vulture. He had that swagger, that posture, that tone, the kind that said, "You don't matter. Not here. Not to me." Back at his cruiser, Dobson had started pacing, jaw working side to side, clearly talking to someone on the radio. His voice was low, but Naomi caught phrases. "California tag. Military ID looks fake. Black female. Suspicious." The words hit like darts. Nothing new, just loud now, less masked. She'd heard that tone before, back when she first enlisted, back when folks told her she didn't look like an officer. And she'd heard it again and again in every subtle jab, every room she walked into where no one expected her to be the one in charge. This wasn't about speeding. This wasn't even about suspicion anymore. It was about control, about ego, about punishing a woman who had the nerve to wear rank and carry herself like she belonged. The big one, the one with the sunglasses still on, even though the sun had dipped low suddenly, banged his fist on the hood. "You hiding something, Colonel?" She turned her head slowly, her voice as even as ever. "No, sir." He scoffed. "You military types think the rules don't apply to you. You flash a badge, expect everyone to bow. Not how it works out here." "I don't expect anyone to bow," she said, locking eyes with him. "I expect the law to be followed." That pushed him. She saw it happen. His lip curled just slightly. and his hand twitched toward his belt. Not the gun, not yet, but the cuffs. He stepped closer. "Turn around!" "Number." He froze, not because she'd yelled, but because she hadn't, because her refusal was calm, measured, like she was the one giving orders. And for a second, just a second, something flickered in his eyes, something between surprise and offense. "You refusing a lawful command?" She didn't budge. "You have no cause to detain me, no evidence, no warrant, and no justification. I've been respectful, cooperative. Your search is illegal. Your behavior is harassment." Dobson stomped back over, red-faced and breathing hard like he'd just jogged a mile. "You think you're some kind of legal expert?" "Huh?" Naomi didn't respond. She didn't have to. She could feel the heat building in her chest, now low, tight, but controlled. She wasn't going to let them take her dignity, no matter how hard they tried. "Get your hands behind your back," Dobson barked, loud enough that it echoed into the trees. Naomi took a step back slowly. "You lay a hand on me without probable cause, and I promise you'll hear from the Pentagon." "This isn't over," he grinned. Not out of joy, but out of spite. "Oh, you're damn right it's not over." He lunged forward and grabbed her wristward, twisting it behind her back. Her training kicked in immediately. Every instinct told her to pivot, counter, flip him off his feet. She could have done it. She could have dropped him right there in the gravel, but she didn't, because the moment she did that, she'd be the one on camera, not them. The angry black woman resisting arrest. Not the decorated surgeon, not the army colonel, not the victim. So she let him yank her arm back, bit her lip against the pain, stared straight ahead as he clamped the cold metal cuff around her wrist and clicked it shut. Then came the second one, rough, too tight, deliberately. She was officially under arrest. "For what charge?" she asked, through clenched teeth. Dobson didn't answer. The big one just said, "We'll figure that out later." He shoved her forward, and she stumbled, catching herself on the hood again. Her metals jangled against the SUV, a bitter sound. She stared down at their reflection in the paint. Silver and brass, each one earned in blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. Each one a story. And now, they looked like props in a theater of shame. She was marched toward Dobson's cruiser. No Miranda rights, no explanation. Just bruising fingers and muttered slurs. And then she felt it. A vibration, faint but steady, on her wrist. The watch, the emergency beacon. It had gone through. She exhaled slowly, hope flickering behind her eyes. Good. Let them come. Dobson pushed her into the back of the squad car. She hit the seat hard, shoulder first, the cuffs biting into her spine. He slammed the door shut with enough force to make the whole vehicle shake. Then he leaned against the window, grinning like a man who thought he'd just won a prize at the county fair. Naomi stared back at him, calm, even as blood pooled in her wrist, even as the weight of helplessness settled in her chest, even as she felt the cold knot of injustice pull tight inside her. She wasn't broken. She wasn't scared. Not really. She was waiting, because something was coming. Dobson didn't know it yet, but that press of a button had flipped the script. He thought he was in control. He thought he was writing her story, sealing her fate. But he didn't realize he'd just put himself on the radar of the very people she worked with. People who don't look kindly on their officers being manhandled on U.S. soil. People with authority, with reach, with power. She glanced at the rearview mirror. He was still smirking, standing with his partner, chatting like this was just another easy day on the job. Like they'd just bagged another lie. But Naomi knew better. The wheels were already in motion, and for the first time since the flashing lights filled her mirror, she let herself smile. Just barely. But it was there. Because Colonel Naomi Bradford was no ordinary woman, and these men had no idea who they'd just messed with. Naomi sat in the back of the patrol car, her hands cuffed, her uniform wrinkled, her wrist aching. The door had slammed shut minutes ago, but the sting of it still vibrated through her bone. Outside, Officers Dobson and his partner were talking, laughing even, like this was just another power trip gone perfectly. No one had stepped in. No one questioned it. Out here, their word was law. But Naomi wasn't focused on them anymore. Not entirely. Her mind was on the faint vibration she'd felt a few minutes earlier. That subtle buzz against her wrist. The emergency signal, activated with one press. Buried in the smart watch strapped beneath her sleeve, it was silent, discreet and powerful. That beacon didn't call 911. It didn't alert the local sheriff's department. No, this one was wired to something far bigger. Pentagon-level clearance, a direct line to the Department of Defense, and more importantly, to one person, Major General Maria Ellis. Naomi had known Ellis since their early days in the field. Back then, they were both captains, stationed at Fort Hood, pulling double duty as officers and medics in a system that rarely made space for women, let alone women of color. They'd seen war together, lost together. They'd grown into their ranks with grit, steel, and more sleepless nights than either of them could count. Ellis was the kind of leader who didn't need to raise her voice to own a room. She was sharp, steady, and absolutely fearless when it came to protecting her people. And when Naomi had selected her emergency contact years ago, there was no second guessing who it would be. So while Dobson strutted around like a high school bully with a badge, Naomi's signal was already screaming through secure channels in D.C. And 800 miles away, in a quiet office on the 5th floor of the Pentagon's South Wing, a red light blinked. Major General Ellis was wrapping up a video call when she saw the signal. Her assistant barely had time to blink before she was on her feet, voice sharp. "Where is she?" the assistant stammered. "Looks like Alabama. Highway 31. About 40 miles outside Birmingham," Ellis muttered under her breath. "What the hell is she doing out there?" Then her voice hardened. "Get me the local MPs at Fort Rucker. Now, I want a secure line to Alabama State Patrol and loop in internal affairs. We've got a live officer in distress." Back in the squad car, Naomi shifted slightly. Her wrists hurt more now. The cuffs had been yanked tight, deliberately so. Every bump in the road jabbed them deeper into her bones. But still, she waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. Then, her watch buzzed again. This time, not faint, not accidental. A coded vibration acknowledgement received. And then her phone, hidden deep in her jacket pocket, buzzed once more. She couldn't reach it, not with her hands cuffed. But she didn't need to. A familiar voice filled the cabin not from the speakers, but from the officer's radio, still tuned to an open channel. "This is Major General Maria Ellis, Department of Defense. I am requesting immediate communication with Officer Ray Dobson regarding a detained federal military asset. Over." Dobson's head jerked up like he'd been slapped. Naomi saw him freeze. He turned to his partner, eyes wide, face suddenly pale beneath the sunset glow. The radio crackled again. "Repeat. This is a direct communication from the Pentagon. Officer Ray Dobson, respond." He grabbed the mic. This is... Dobson, go ahead. This is a formal notice. You are currently detaining Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Bradford, a commissioned officer in the United States Army Medical Corps, under Title 10 protection. Your conduct is under review and you are hereby ordered to cease detainment immediately. Release her, return all possessions, and await further instruction from Alabama State Command. Silence. Naomi could see it happening, the gears grinding behind Dobson's eyes, the confusion, the fear, the stubborn pride. He wasn't just losing control of the situation, he was realizing the woman he'd cuffed like a criminal was someone Washington would go to war for. He didn't speak, didn't move. So Ellis came again, sharper. "If Lieutenant Colonel Bradford is not released in the next 60 seconds, you will be facing federal obstruction charges. We are already coordinating with the FBI. Consider this your final warning." Naomi didn't need to look to know the panic had set in. She heard it in the crunch of boots on gravel. Dobson flung the door open. "Step out," he barked, but there was no anger in his voice now. Just fear, confusion, shame. She did as asked, but not because of him. She stepped out with her head high, back straight. Like the officer she was, no, like the officer she still was. His partner hovered close, fumbling with the key. It took 3 tries to get the cuffs off. As they slipped free, Naomi rubbed her wrists gently. Red, bruised, but unbroken. Dobson handed over her ID, her papers, everything they'd ripped from her minutes ago. "Just a misunderstanding," he muttered. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any threat. Then, her phone rang. She pulled it from her pocket, saw the name flash across the screen. "General," she answered, voice steady. "Colonel Bradford." Ellis didn't waste time. Are you safe? Yes, ma'am. Do not move. A military escort is en route to your location. Stay visible. Record everything. Naomi nodded. Copy that. Then, she turned to Dobson, holding the phone just loud enough for him to hear. You just made the biggest mistake of your career. He looked like he wanted to vanish into the asphalt. And Naomi? She stood there, uniform still dusty, face set like stone, not just surviving this moment, but owning it. Because some men still didn't understand what it meant to mess with a black woman in uniform. And now, thanks to one call, the world was about to learn just how deep her reach went. The sun had nearly dipped below the treetops now. The warm Alabama breeze that once whispered through the leaves had gone still, like even the air knew what was coming. Naomi stood just off the highway, dust swirling around her boots, wrists red and raw from the cuffs that had just been removed. Her SUV sat behind her, ransacked but intact. Officers Dobson and his partner lingered awkwardly by their patrol cars, trying to look busy checking radios, pacing anything to avoid eye contact. They had no idea what to do next. And honestly, Naomi did. She knew exactly what was happening. They weren't just scared because of who she was. They were scared because someone far above their pay grade had just ripped the rug out from under them. That kind of panic didn't come from guilt. It came from exposure, the kind of exposure you can't hide from. She watched them closely. They weren't just shaken, they were communicating, subtly. Side glances, quiet muttering, radio clicks that didn't sound like normal dispatch chatter. That's when she knew. This wasn't just two bad cops having a power trip. This was a pattern, a network, something bigger. And whatever it was, they weren't ready to let it go without a fight. Her phone buzzed again. Colonel Bradford, came Ellis's voice, calm but clipped. Still on the shoulder, Naomi replied. They've backed off, but they're stalling. Trying to act like it never happened. I've got Fort Rucker MPs en route, ETA 10 minutes, Ellis said. But listen closely, we've intercepted some chatter on state channels. Someone's trying to reroute local jurisdiction. There's talk about sending you to the nearest county station. Not good. Naomi's stomach tightened. That wouldn't be a mistake, she said. That'd be a setup. Exactly. If they try to transport you again, refuse. Use the authority in your ID. Record everything. We're launching a formal complaint against the Dust Ridge PD. You're not alone, Colonel. But you've stirred something. Naomi closed her eyes for a beat. She could feel it now, something underneath all this. Something ugly, like rot beneath paint. The second officer, the tall one with the shaved head, stepped forward. Ma'am, he said, voice suddenly sugar-coated. Just want to let you know we're going to write this up as a misunderstanding. You're free to go. Free to go. Like this was all just some parking ticket mix-up. Naomi didn't move. She just raised her phone, started recording. State your name, officer, she said clearly. He blinked. Excuse me? Your name, badge number, and your reason for detaining a federal officer under Title T protection. He hesitated. You, we're not under arrest anymore. Then explain why I was cuffed and searched without cause, why my vehicle was rifled through, why I wasn't read my rights, and why you're now trying to walk it all back without a report. The silence said more than any words could. Behind him, Dobson was already in motion, not toward her but toward his cruiser. He got in, slammed the door, and pulled his radio to his lips. Not to dispatch. No, this wasn't for the record. This was something else. She watched his mouth move, saw the way his hand covered the mic like he didn't want anyone to hear. But Naomi had learned how to read lips during blackouts in Kandahar, and what she saw chilled her. Sheriff says get her to county, Dobson muttered. Quietly. County. So Ellis had been right. They were trying to disappear her. She stepped back toward her SUV, never taking her eyes off them. She unlocked the door, slid in, and locked it again. Her hands gripped the steering wheel like it was an anchor. Then she whispered, "They're trying to move me." Ellis didn't hesitate. "Then you don't move." Naomi could see the tension boiling now. Dobson and his partner were in a quiet argument by their car. Too much whispering, too many sideways looks. And then a third car pulled up. An unmarked sedan. Tinted windows, no plates. The door opened, and a man stepped out. Older, heavy-set, dressed like a Southern politician trying to pass for a civilian button-down shirt, tucked-in jeans, expensive boots. His eyes were cold and calculating. "Colonel Bradford," he said smoothly. "I'm Sheriff Dean Mercer. Heard there was a little confusion out here." Naomi didn't move. "Why is a sheriff showing up for a traffic stop?" she asked through the cracked window. Mercer chuckled like they were old friends sharing a private joke. "I like to be hands-on, especially when I hear a federal officer's involved. Thought I'd stop by, make sure we got things squared away." Ellis's voice hissed in her ear. "That man is dirty. I've got reports on him going back years. Ties to voter suppression cases, use of force lawsuits. Do not let him take you anywhere." Naomi opened her door, just enough to step out, slowly. She held her badge and ID in one hand, her phone in the other, still recording. "Sheriff Mercer," she said loud and clear. "I am a federal officer under active reserve duty. You have no authority to detain or transport me without written orders from the Department of Defense or a federal judge." Mercer's smile faltered just a hair. Then he sighed. "Ma'am, I think you're blowing this way out of proportion. Let's not make a scene." "I'm not making a scene," Naomi said. "I'm documenting one." That was it, the line that shifted everything. Dobson's face twisted. His partner cursed under his breath. "And Mercer?" He took a slow step forward. "I don't think you understand where you are." Naomi stood her ground. "I don't think you understand who I am." And then, like thunder splitting a quiet sky, the roar of a military Humvee shook the road. Two vehicles, olive drab, marked with Fort Rucker insignia, armed MPs inside, uniforms spotless, boots hitting gravel with crisp precision. One of them, a young captain barely old enough to rent a car, stepped forward. "Lieutenant Colonel Bradford," he asked. She nodded once. "Orders from the Pentagon. We're here to escort you. These officers," he turned to Mercer and the others, "are to back away immediately." Mercer opened his mouth to argue, but the MPs raised their rifles, casually but deliberately. This wasn't a negotiation. Naomi turned to the sheriff one last time. "Your badge doesn't work on me." And with that, she stepped into the Humvee. The doors shut. The convoy rolled. And behind them, the Alabama dirt swirled up into a stormone that was about to hit Dust Ridge like a reckoning. The ride from the highway to the Dust Ridge County Sheriff's Office was only about 15 minutes. But to Naomi, it felt like a descent into something colder, something meaner than any battlefield she'd ever walked. And that included Kandahar. After the Humvees pulled away and the MPs were forced to stop at a checkpoint suspiciously down for system maintenance, Sheriff Mercer had made his move. Fast. Aggressive. He ordered Dobson and his men to handle it the old-fashioned way. That meant slamming the legal door shut and opening the one nobody was supposed to see. Naomi wasn't taken to a state facility, or even a proper city jail. They brought her to a small, windowless concrete building out behind the county courthouse. One of those annex units that didn't show up on state maps and didn't operate with oversight. Just a long hallway, flickering lights, and that smell-damp cement, bleach, and something else underneath it. Something sour, human. She was pushed inside by a deputy who never once said his name, just yanked open a door and tossed her inside. The room wasn't a holding cell, it was a box. 10 by 10, cinderblock walls, a steel bench bolted to the floor, and a drain in the center of the stained concrete. That was it. No camera, no clock, no window. The door slammed, and the silence settled. Naomi sat on that bench, her back against the wall, her uniform wrinkled and stained with highway dust. Her hands were sore, bruised from the cuffs, but her posture didn't break. She'd trained for endurance, for pressure, for capture. She'd taught SEER classes, herself survival, evasion, resistance, and escape. She knew the games they played, she just didn't expect to be playing them here, on her own soil. An hour passed, maybe two. Then the door creaked open again. A different deputy stepped in. Younger, twitchy, beard half grown in. He carried a clipboard and a baton, and nothing about him said professional. "Stand up," he ordered. Naomi rose slowly, making sure not to move too fast, letting him feel like he had control. He motioned for her to step forward, and she did. Without warning, he shoved her against the wall, one arm across her back. "Turn around!" She didn't resist. He patted her down again, rougher than before, even though she'd already been searched twice. It wasn't about safety, it was about dominance, about reminding her that in here, she wasn't a colonel. She was just another body in a box. "You got a smart mouth," he muttered, too close to her ear. "Bet that gets you in trouble." Naomi stared at the wall, steady. "You're making a mistake." He pulled back, slapped the baton against his hand once. "You people always say that." She didn't respond. She wouldn't give him what he wanted. He shoved her back toward the bench and left the room. Another hour passed. No food, no water, just the hum of the single light bulb above her, flickering now and then like it might just burn out. At some point, a woman came in. Plain clothes. Clipboard. Said she was from Records. Asked Naomi to state her name. Rank. Branch. Naomi gave her nothing but the basics. The woman rolled her eyes. "You're not helping yourself." "I don't need help," Naomi replied. And the woman left. It went on like that. In and out. More deputies. One with a camera, taking photos without explanation. Another who took her boots, her belt, even her dog tags. No one read her rights. No one gave her a reason. And she kept thinking, this is how it happens. This is how you disappear. Not in a foreign war zone. Not in some back alley of a collapsing country. Here, in America, at the hands of men who wore badges not because they earned them, but because they needed something to hide behind. When they finally gave her water, it was from a plastic cup that tasted like metal. Warm. Stale. Just enough to keep her quiet, but she wasn't broken. Number. Naomi sat on that bench with her back straight and her eyes locked on the door. And in her mind, she went home. She saw her backyard in Georgia, the garden, the hummingbird she fed in the early mornings, the photo of her parents on the mantle, her niece's graduation next month. She held on to those things, anchored herself with them, because they couldn't take that, not even with shackles. Then came the worst part. A deputy entered, flanked by another, both wearing latex gloves. They didn't say why. They didn't ask. They just told her to stand and remove her uniform. Naomi stared at them. "I won't do that," she said, voice low but firm. "It's procedure," one of them lied. "I'm a decorated officer in the United States Army," she said. "You have no authority to strip. Search me without a court order or supervisor present." They didn't like that. The bigger one stepped forward. "You want to do this the hard way? Fine." And they grabbed her. Naomi didn't fight. Not because she was afraid, because she knew she had to outlast them. Let the evidence speak for itself. Every bruise, every scrape, every wrong move. They pulled her jacket down roughly, yanked at her undershirt. She kept her chin high, tears stinging at the corners of her eyes, not from pain, but from the insult. The violation, the sheer indignity of it all. And all she kept thinking was, if this is what they do to me, what are they doing to the people no one ever calls back for? When it was over, they left her half-dressed, shoved into a corner, clothes crumpled on the floor. They walked out without a word. Naomi pulled herself back together, slow and deliberate, each movement a reclaiming of power, of identity. She tucked her shirt in, straightened her back, and sat down again. She waited, because she knew something they didn't. They thought she was alone, but the world was watching now. Ellis had promised to sound the alarm. The Pentagon was involved. And somewhere out there, someone was coming. And when they did, these men wouldn't be able to hide behind shadows anymore. Their small-town kingdom was crumbling. And Naomi Bradford was still standing, still a soldier, still unbreakable, even behind a locked door. They thought they had time. They thought that little station, tucked behind the courthouse like a forgotten relic of Jim Crow, was still invisible to the world, that they could rough her up, humiliate her, leave her bruised and silent, and nobody would ask questions. But they didn't know who they were dealing with. And they sure as hell didn't know who was on the other end of that emergency beacon. In Washington, Major General Maria Ellis was no longer sitting behind a desk. She was walking down a Pentagon corridor lined with steel and secrets, flanked by 2 aides, voice sharp, orders flying faster than the staff could keep up. "I want a secure line to the Alabama governor's office." Not his assistant, the man himself. Loop in the Inspector General and Civil Rights Division. And find out why the Fort Rucker MPs were intercepted en route. That's obstruction. "I want names." The room she entered wasn't flashy. No flags, no windows. Just a situation room with a wall of screens, live feeds, and blinking dots across a state map. One of them pulsed red. "Dustridge. Give me visuals," Ellis barked. "Whatever we can access," a tech replied. "No state surveillance feeds in that area. Counties offline, either corrupted or wiped," she cursed under her breath. "Then we go analog. Get satellite eyes on that site. Heat signatures, vehicle counts. I want to know who's inside and what the hell they're doing to my officer. Back in that cold cell, Naomi's body was aching. Her wrists were swollen, her ribs sore from the search that wasn't a search. But she never let herself curl up, never let her back hit the wall like she was beaten. She stayed upright, awake, listening. She counted footsteps when deputies passed outside the door, measured the pauses between radio static, tracked time the way soldiers do by breath, not by clock. And even through the pain, through the silence, she knew. They're coming. It wasn't a matter of if, it was when. And when they did, everything would change. Out on the highway, just 10 miles south, 3 black SUVs barreled through the dusk like storm clouds with engines. No sirens, no lights, just force in motion. Into the sat federal agents, DOJ, military police, internal affairs. This wasn't local anymore. One SUV peeled off toward the Dust Ridge Sheriff's Office, another toward the courthouse. The third? It kept going. Toward that forgotten annex. Toward her, Deputy Tanner was on his second smoke break when he saw the headlights. Big ones, fast ones, too organized to be tourists, too clean to be locals. He dropped his cigarette. By the time he reached the door, the agents were already there. They didn't yell, didn't draw guns, didn't need to. They had authority stitched into every step, badges ready, warrant in hand, backed by enough muscle and federal weight to crush that whole operation flat. "Step aside," one of them said. A woman, tall, afro pulled tight, eyes sharp. Tanner stammered, "You can't just, this is county." She held up the warrant. "You want to try me?" He didn't. They pushed through. Inside, Naomi heard the click of boots, not heavy and hostile, but quick, purposeful, tactical. The door opened, not slammed, just opened, and in stepped a uniform she didn't recognize at first. Then she saw the nameplate. Captain J. Reyes, CID. Criminal Investigation Division. Naomi exhaled a shaky, quiet breath, and for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to blink. "Lieutenant Colonel Bradford," Reyes said gently. "We're here. You're safe." Naomi nodded once. "Took you long enough." Reyes gave a small smile. Traffic. Behind her, agents moved in. 2 flanked the door. Another took photographs. A 4th pulled out a tablet and began logging every detail of the room. And Reyes, she stepped forward, pulled out a thermal blanket, and gently draped it over Naomi's shoulders. "Can you walk?" she asked. "I've walked through worse," Naomi replied. Reyes didn't doubt it. As they led her out of that building past deputies who suddenly had nothing to say, nothing to look at but the floor, the silence was its own kind of justice. They hadn't expected cameras, or feds, or a woman still standing, but here she was, alive, unbroken, and watching. Naomi was placed gently into a waiting vehicle. No cuffs, no barking, just quiet professionals doing what they were trained to do. As the SUV pulled away, she turned slightly to look out the back window. That annex? That hellhole? It was already swarming. FBI jackets moving like bees around a nest, taking notes, snapping pictures, measuring the hallway, documenting every inch of what they'd done. And for the first time, Naomi smiled. Not because it was over, but because it had begun. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every woman, every soldier, every civilian who'd ever been dragged into a room like that and never seen sunlight on their terms again. Justice had walked through the door, and she was wide awake now. The sun was gone now, swallowed by the horizon, and in its place, the kind of night that didn't need darkness to feel heavy. It hung in the air like smoke thick, unmoving, full of things unsaid. The convoy carrying Naomi back towards safety moved like a tide through Dust Ridge. Federal agents, military police, sibilant, serious, unstoppable. 3 black SUVs, 2 marked Humvees, and above them, somewhere miles up, a satellite pinged their position every 10 seconds. The Pentagon didn't play games when one of their own was dragged into the mud. But back at the sheriff's office, the game was still being played. Sheriff Dean Mercer stood behind his desk, hands braced on the edge, staring down at a map of his county like it still meant something, like borders on paper could protect him from what was coming. He was sweating, not from heat, from consequence. "You need to calm down," said one of his deputies. "They don't got nothing solid." Mercer shot him a glare. "They don't need solid. They've got eyes now. They've got feds crawling around that annex like roaches. You think they won't connect it all?" The deputy shrugged. It's her word against ours. She's just one woman. Mercer slammed his fist down. She's not just one woman. She's a colonel. And she made a call none of us were ready for. Because the truth was, Mercer hadn't just ordered Naomi held. He'd done it before. Quiet detentions, lost paperwork, a system built on fear and silence. He'd run that county like a kingdom, but he'd gotten too comfortable. And this time, he'd pulled over a lioness in uniform. And now the pride was circling. At that very moment, across town, Naomi sat inside the lead SUV, her eyes fixed on the courthouse steps ahead. They were back where it started. But this time, the power had shifted. Waiting at the entrance were two state attorneys, a U.S. Marshal, and a legal rep from the DOD. Everyone looked tense, but no one was panicked. Not anymore. The panic had changed sides. Captain Reyes looked over from the passenger seat. "We'll take you through the front. Everyone's watching now." Naomi nodded. "Good, let them." When the SUV door opened, cameras clicked. News crews had already caught wind of the chaos, and while they hadn't seen the whole story yet, they knew enough to show up. Naomi stepped out, not in cuffs, not escorted like a suspect, but with authority, with presence. She walked up those courthouse steps with every bit of rank, dignity, and steel that had carried her through war zones. Inside, the building buzzed with heat and nervous energy. The sheriff's staff clerks, deputies, assistants, moved like people who suddenly realized the walls had ears. And in the center of it all stood Mercer, arms folded, trying to look unmoved. "You've made quite a mess," he said, voice low. Naomi stepped forward. "No, Sheriff, you did." Before he could respond, a voice cut in from the side. "I think that's enough." It was the U.S. Marshal. He handed Mercer a folder, sealed, stamped, heavy. "Orders from the DOJ. You're suspended, effective immediately. Step aside." Mercer didn't move. So the Marshal leaned in, eyes hard. "This isn't Dust Ridge anymore. This is federal. And I suggest you start cooperating before we open every file you thought was buried." Mercer's jaw tightened. "You think you're gonna clean house overnight? You have no idea what's buried in this town." Naomi stepped in, quiet but sharp. "Then maybe it's time someone dug it up." The confrontation drew in everyone. Staff stopped working. Cameras peeked around corners. For the first time in decades, someone told the sheriff no, and he had to listen. He stepped back, a single inch, but it was enough. The marshal nodded to his team. "Secure the office. Start pulling files. Nothing leaves this building." Then he turned to Naomi. "You ready to make your statement?" She didn't even blink. "Been ready." They led her into a side chamber, clean, well lit, lined with recorders and federal observers. Captain Reyes stayed close, as did Ellis, patched in remotely from D.C., her face calm on a wall-mounted screen. Naomi sat at the head of the table. She didn't fumble for words. She didn't soften the truth. She told it plain. The stop, the verbal abuse, the illegal search, the assault, the detention, the strip search, the fear, and how she never lost her composure. Not once, because she couldn't afford to, because too many people would never hear her story if she didn't survive it. By the time she finished, no one in that room was breathing quite the same. Silence followed. Heavy, respectful. Ellis broke it first. "Colonel, I hope you know what you did today doesn't just protect you, it protects every soldier coming after you." Naomi gave a tired nod. Then it was worth it. The next few hours moved like a controlled storm. Warrants were issued. Deputies were questioned. Some detained. Sheriff Mercer was escorted out in handcuffs, not for assault, not yet, but for obstruction, interference with a federal investigation, and suppression of civil rights under color of law. More charges were coming. That much was clear. But for now, justice had begun its march. And Naomi? She finally stood outside that courthouse, the night air wrapping around her like armor. Reporters swarmed, but she said nothing. Not yet. Not until it was time. Back in the SUV, Reyes looked over. "You want to speak on this?" Naomi shook her head. "Not here. Not tonight. Let them write their headlines. I'll write the truth." Because she knew this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about Dust Ridge, about every small-town backroom with a badge and no conscience. It was about showing them that the uniform didn't make her weak. It made her powerful. And now the system had to answer for what it had done. By the next morning, Dust Ridge wasn't just a small Alabama town anymore. It was a headline. Every major network had picked up the story, Army Colonel illegally detained in small town, sheriff suspended after Pentagon intervention, federal investigation launched into rural law enforcement abuse. The hashtags came fast. Number Justice for Naomi, number Colonel Bradford, number Dustridge exposed. Twitter threads unraveled the case minute by minute. TikToks played back voiceovers of her testimony. News panels argued the politics, but the people they just listened, and most of them were angry, because it wasn't just about Naomi anymore. It was about what she represented. A black woman, in uniform, treated like a criminal for doing nothing but driving while existing, for holding rank in a country that still treated her like she needed to prove herself every time she walked into a room. But she didn't have to prove anything. She already had. Sheriff Mercer's mugshot made the evening news. His face pale, defiant, flashed across millions of screens. Alongside it, video of him refusing to stand down. Eyewitness reports from the courthouse. Leaked footage of the deputies whispering before Naomi was moved to that annex. It all told the same story. This wasn't one man making a mistake. This was a system operating exactly how it was designed. But that system? It was cracking. By the time Naomi stepped off the military transport back into D.C., she was no longer just a soldier. She was a symbol. And she hated that, not because she feared the weight, but because she never asked for the spotlight. She didn't want to be anyone's headline. She wanted to retire in peace, plant tomatoes, paint landscapes, maybe teach a workshop or two on battlefield medicine. Instead, she was on the front lines again. Only this time, the wounds weren't physical. They were institutional. At the Pentagon, she was greeted with quiet salutes and hushed thank yous. Ellis met her with an embrace, brief, strong, no words needed. Everyone understood what had happened. But now they had to figure out what to do with it. The Justice Department began its official inquiry. Multiple Dustridge deputies were placed on administrative leave. Internal Affairs sent a full audit team into the county's records use of force reports, booking logs, sealed complaints. Some went back years. And what they found? It wasn't pretty. Naomi had cracked the surface. Beneath it was decades of rot, dozens of similar detainments, missing footage, complaints accidentally lost, testimonies from civilians who had been ignored for far too long. One story led to another. One victim became 10. Then 20. Some had no voice. Some had never filed because they knew better. But Naomi had changed that. Her uniform had bought the silence no one else could breach. And the silence was over. Politicians scrambled to respond. Some praised her, called her brave, a hero, a patriot. Others, they tried to spin it, claimed she overreacted, that Mercer's intentions were misrepresented, that context was needed. But context didn't change bruises, didn't explain strip searches, didn't excuse the way two men thought they could vanish a decorated army officer into a concrete room and make her disappear. One senator, Hubert Dobson, Ray Dobson's uncle, went on national television, red-faced and shaking, defending the officers and calling the federal response a political witch hunt. Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't respond. She didn't need to, because the country had already seen enough. And the truth? It didn't need defending. It just needed daylight. In private, Ellis offered Naomi a position, a newly created post in the Pentagon's Civil Oversight Task Force. Policy, ethics, reform. Naomi hesitated. She was still reeling, still sore in more ways than one. But the offer wasn't about politics. It was about change. "We need people like you at the table," Ellis said. "Because they sure as hell don't want us there." Naomi didn't give an answer. Not yet. Instead, she focused on healing. The physical bruises faded fast. But the others, the ones in her trust, in her peace, in her sense of place in the country she'd served for decades, those took more time. She spent a few days out of the spotlight. No press, no public statements, just silence, reflection. A few close friends stopped by. Her niece brought flowers. A former Army nurse sent her a letter that simply read, "You made it safer for the rest of us." And that more than any camera, any article, any press conference, that meant something. She didn't need fame. She needed purpose. And maybe, now, that purpose was changing. Because something else had shifted, too. People were asking harder questions now, not just about Dustridge, but about every small town where power had gone unchecked, every department where oversight was treated like an inconvenience, every badge worn as armor against accountability. This wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was a spark, and Naomi? She wasn't done yet. A few weeks later, Naomi found herself standing beneath the marble columns of Capitol Hill. Not in uniform, not in cuffs, but in something far more powerful, her truth. The Senate hearing room was quiet when she walked in, not silent, but respectful. A kind of stillness reserved for people who've seen things most others can't imagine. There were generals seated behind her, lawyers in dark suits, members of Congress with notes stacked high. But all eyes landed on her because they knew why she was here. She didn't need to raise her voice when she spoke. She didn't need dramatics, or emotion, or polished sound bites. She just told the story of what happened, of how quickly dignity can be stripped away when systems are left unchecked, of how a decorated officer, someone who had worn the flag in combat zones, saved lives under fire, and devoted decades to service could still be dragged, searched, silenced, and nearly erased because of how she looked and where she was. She paused, more than once. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because she knew the power of a well-placed silence. She talked about the cold concrete cell, the smirk on Dobson's face, the ache in her wrist where the cuffs had bitten deep. But she also talked about resilience. The moment the agents walked through the door, the shift in energy when justice stepped in. And most of all, the quiet choice she made not to fight back with rage or violence, but with grace, with record, with resolve. When she finished, the room was still. Even the politicians who had come to defend the system sat a little quieter. A few tried to pivot, asked about policy, statistics, interpretation of procedures. Naomi smiled gently and said, "You can't fix a broken system with paperwork. You fix it by looking it in the eye." The moment went viral. Millions watched it that night. Not because it was loud, but because it was honest. Naomi didn't walk out to applause. She didn't want it. That wasn't why she came. She came to make sure the silence didn't win. Outside the Capitol, the sky was wide and open. Spring had crept into the air. The breeze was soft. Trees were blooming along the National Mall, and crowds had gathered, watching the live stream on phones, tablets, news vans humming in the background. As Naomi stepped down the granite steps, something stopped her. An older man, Vietnam veteran, judging by the ribbon on his lapel and the slight tremble in his hand, stepped forward. He didn't speak at first, just took off his cap and held it to his chest. "I was detained once," he said finally. 1969, marching in Georgia. They roughed me up, called me names, told me I wasn't a real American. Naomi nodded. "I didn't have a watch that called the Pentagon," he added with a faint smile. "But seeing you walk out of there today, that made it worth the wait." Naomi reached out, shook his hand firm, steady, the way soldiers do. Then she turned, walked toward the black car waiting by the curb. She had no need to speak to the press. They had enough sound bites. The real message had already been delivered. Over the next few months, change came slowly. But it came. The Dust Ridge Sheriff's Department was placed under federal oversight. Mercer faced multiple indictments. Dobson lost his badge, and several deputies were charged with civil rights violations. And more people stepped forward, civilians, veterans, women, men, all with their own versions of what Naomi had lived. And back in D.C., the task force Ellis had promised, it was real now, funded, empowered, and at its helm sat Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Bradford. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she had more to give. She didn't bark orders. She didn't shake the system with threats. She listened. She taught. She helped write new training models for federal, state, and local agencies. And every week, she made time to speak with cadets and young officers, not about tactics, about empathy, about what power really means. Because if one thing had become clear, it was this: respect isn't something you demand with a badge, it's something you earn with your actions. In the end, Naomi didn't become a martyr. She became something stronger, a mirror, one the system couldn't look away from anymore. And though she never sought the title, she wore it well. A soldier, a survivor, and now a symbol of the America we should be. Sometimes, life reminds us that the fight for dignity never really ends, not with medals, not with years served, and not even with age. Naomi's story isn't just about injustice, it's about resilience. It's about the quiet strength it takes to stand tall when others try to tear you down, and the power of staying calm when you have every reason not to. For those of us who've lived through decades of change, through civil rights marches, through war, through social upheaval, this story feels familiar. It reminds us that progress must be protected, that silence in the face of wrong only feeds the system that thrives on fear. But it also reminds us of something hopeful, that courage still matters, that doing the right thing, even when it's hard, still echoes. Naomi didn't raise her voice, she raised her presence. And in doing so, she proved that strength isn't always loud, but it's always felt. If this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of something you've lived through, or someone you love, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your voice, your support, and your wisdom help keep stories like this alive. Thank you for watching.